A woman was on her way to her first day at work, excited, hopeful, dressed neatly in her favorite hijab. But she never made it. Hours later, her body was found, naked, bruised, and abandoned at a construction site. What happened in those missing hours would uncover one of the most horrifying crimes in Malaysia's history. This is a case that left Malaysia stunned. Some even call it Malaysia's Nirbhaya case, a reference to India's infamous 2012 bus rape murder that sparked international outrage. But this one happened long before that. This is the case of Nor Suzaili Mokhtar. It was October 7th, 2000. A bus rolled down a quiet road in Selangor, Malaysia. To most, it looked like any other day. But four people on the street noticed something deeply disturbing. Inside the bus, through the window, they saw a woman, half naked, panicked, struggling, clearly in distress. She was trying to get help. Immediately, the four of them sprang into action. One of them, Divan, just 18 at the time, got on his bicycle and pedaled as fast as he could. Another was on a motorcycle. The other two were older, one in his 50s and the last a local driving school instructor. As they chased the bus, they could hear the driver yelling at them, shouting at them to stop following, to leave him alone. But they didn't stop. They kept going, following the bus through Taman Chiliung, then turning down Jalan Sambao. At one point, the driver reversed the vehicle abruptly, then sped off again back toward Taman Chiliung, driving fast and erratic. Eventually, the bus disappeared into a secluded area. The group couldn't keep up. Later that same day, in the afternoon, a passerby stumbled upon something horrifying at a construction site in a quiet part of Taman Bukit Tinggi. There, lying naked in the dirt, was the body of a young woman. Her body had been brutalized. The autopsy later revealed 44 separate injuries. Her neck was broken, deep, long bruises wrapped around her throat, clear signs of strangulation. There were also traces of semen found in both her genital and anal areas. The evidence was undeniable. She had been sexually assaulted, then murdered. Eventually, police were able to identify her. Her name was Nor Suzaili Mokhtar. She was just 24 years old. So who was Nor? How did she end up in such a terrifying situation? And who was the man behind it all? Let's take a step back and look at Nor's life before the tragedy. Her name was Nor Suzaili Mokhtar. She was born in Kangar, Perlis, the third of four siblings, and the only daughter in the family. Naturally, everyone doted on her. Her parents, Mukhtar Ibrahim, 72, and Harrison Hussein, 68, did everything they could to give Nor the best life possible. They respected her space, supported her dreams, and encouraged her studies. Nor wasn't the type to waste time. She was focused, driven, and had a clear goal in mind from a young age. She wanted to become a computer engineer. She was known for the dimple on her cheek, her warm smile, and her deep love of science. It wasn't long before her hard work paid off. Nor earned a place at De Montfort University in the United Kingdom, where she studied computer science. Her friends there called her Susie. She was outgoing, friendly, and the kind of person you instantly liked. Someone who'd become your friend just from a simple hello. And after all that effort, Noor finally landed her dream job. She received an offer to work as a computer engineer at Pantai Medical Center in Klang. She was thrilled, so much so that she couldn't sleep the night before her first day. Her parents and brothers were just as excited. The little girl who had spent years chasing her dream was finally making it real. That day was October 7th, 2000. Noor woke up early, said her morning prayer, and did some quick chores before getting dressed. She chose a modest top and skirt paired with her favorite hijab. It wasn't anything fancy, but she looked neat, graceful, and proud, ready to step into a new chapter. At around 7:30 a.m., Noor left her rented house in Kampung Baru, heading toward her new workplace. It wasn't far, just a short bus ride followed by a walk. Like many others, she boarded the Express Kiara bus, registration number WE4256, which ran the Kuala Lumpur to Port Klang route. And at first, everything seemed normal. There were several other passengers on board. The bus made its usual stops, picking up and dropping off commuters. Over time, the passengers trickled off until only 2 people left, Nor and a man of Bangladeshi nationality. Then, that man got off too. Now, Nor was alone, sitting quietly, scrolling through her phone, probably daydreaming about her first day, excited, maybe even a little nervous. She had no idea that her life was about to take a horrifying turn. Because the man driving the bus, Mohammed Hanafi Abdul Rahman, had been watching her. He kept glancing back, biting his lip, not out of dryness or habit, but to suppress something rising inside him. Lust. It started with a look, then a thought, then something darker. He stared at Nor like she was no longer a passenger, but prey. He lost the fight with his conscience. Instead of stopping near Pantai Medical Center, where Nor was supposed to get off for work, he changed the route. The bus veered away from the familiar path and turned onto Jalan Bukit Tinggi, a quieter, more secluded road. At first, Nor didn't notice. Maybe she thought the route had changed due to traffic. But soon, the unfamiliar turns made her uneasy. Something wasn't right. She tried to stay calm. Maybe there was a reason. But when her eyes met the driver's in the rearview mirror, a chill ran down her spine. His gaze wasn't normal. It was predatory. Nor stood up from her seat, trying to act casual. She was sweating, her heart likely pounding. But before she could move any further, Hanafi struck. He didn't wait. He rushed at her, taking advantage of the empty bus and the isolation of the road. And in that moment, Nor knew she wasn't going to make it to work. Her dream job, her first day, everything she had worked for was suddenly slipping away. Nor tried to scream. She cried out for help as loud as she could. Her voice echoed through the empty bus, but no one was there to help her. The driver, Hanafi, startled by her screams, lunged at her. He began touching her body, violating the very dignity she had protected all her life. She fought back. She resisted. She pounded her fist against the windows, hoping anyone might see what was happening. He beat her, striking her down to silence her. What happened next only took minutes, but for Nor, it must have felt like hours. An endless nightmare playing out in a space meant to be safe. A public bus. Then, finally, someone saw her. When Nor was still struggling inside the bus, Hanafi began undoing her long-sleeved top, stripping her of her clothes as she continued banging the window. Her desperation wasn't in vain. 4 people happened to be passing by the road at that exact moment. They saw it. Inside the bus was a topless woman screaming for help, her hands frantically beating on the glass. One of them was Devan, an 18-year-old student cycling to his tuition class. He noticed the bus parked strangely along Lorong Pegaga in Klang, and something about it didn't sit right. As he got closer, the horrifying scene inside became clear. Devan wasn't alone. 3 others soon joined the chase, a man on a motorcycle, another in his 50s, and a driving school instructor. They all realized what they were witnessing, and they had to act. Devan rode up close enough to get a look at the driver, a stocky man walking back toward the driver's seat, pulling up his pants. But as soon as Hanafi noticed them, he reversed the bus suddenly, then drove off fast, heading back toward the Taman Chiliung roundabout. The 4 men gave chase, but the bus was already disappearing. In the end, they lost him. Hanafi didn't stop until he reached a secluded area in Taman Bukit Tinggi. There, with no one around, he unleashed the full extent of his violence. He raped Nor, then he sodomized her. All the while, she fought, she cried, screamed, and begged for help, but in a quiet, empty area, no one heard her. She was alone, trapped with a man nearly twice her size, who saw her not as a person, but as something to conquer. Even after the repeated assaults, Nor still tried to resist. So Hanafi grabbed the very hijab she wore with pride and wrapped it around her neck. He strangled her while still raping her. She fought to the end, but her strength was no match for his. As he tightened the cloth around her throat, something gave way. There was a snap, the sound of her neck breaking, and just like that, Nor Suzaili Mokhtar was gone. Once he was sure she was dead, Hanafi dragged her body to the door, opened it, and threw her naked corpse out of the bus, dumping it near a construction site like garbage. Then he drove off, leaving her behind, alone, cold, and broken. Tears were still dried on her face. Later that same afternoon, a passerby entered the construction area and came upon the scene. At first, he couldn't process what he was seeing. Lying there was a naked woman covered in bruises with a hijab still tightly wrapped around her neck. One of her shoes was still clinging on her foot. He paused, stared, tried to make sense of the horror in front of him. And then he called the police. A report was quickly lodged. Police arrived at the scene not long after the report came in. Near Nor's body, they discovered a long-sleeved top and a skirt, presumably the clothes she had been wearing before the attack. There was no bag, no ID, nothing that could immediately tell them who she was. The autopsy was performed by Dr. Halim bin Mansar, a forensic pathologist at the hospital, and what he found was devastating. The cause of death was ligature strangulation and blunt trauma to the head. Nor had endured 44 distinct injuries, including a broken neck, a clear sign of the violence she had suffered. Dr. Halim also confirmed the presence of semen and male DNA in both her genital and anal regions, conclusively proving that she had been raped and sodomized before her death. Meanwhile, the investigation pressed forward. Police began tracking down the eyewitnesses who had seen Nor inside the bus that morning. The 4 individuals who chased the bus, including Divan. They were able to reconstruct the route the bus had taken. Piece by piece, the officers followed the trail until they found the identity of the man behind the wheel. His name was Hanafi Mat Hassan. And when his name went public, people started asking, who was he? Did he know Nor? Was this random, planned? The questions were swirling. But then came a bombshell. Nor wasn't Hanafi's first victim. At the time of the murder, Hanafi was 34 years old, originally from Binjai, Kelantan. He was the 7th of 8 siblings, and at first glance looked like just another man trying to support a family. He was living in Bachok, married for the 4th time, and had 3 daughters from his previous 3 marriages. From the outside, people saw a man with bad luck in love, but behind closed doors, it was a different story. According to police records, Hanafi had a history of violent crime, specifically sexual violence. In 1988, he was convicted of raping one of his ex-wives in Mantaka, Pahang. That alone painted a chilling picture. But there was more. In 1994, he was charged with criminal breach of trust in Subang Jaya, Selangor. And in 1996, he was convicted of robbery causing injury in Chukai, Terengganu. For that crime, he served 30 months in prison and received 2 strokes of the cane. People thought maybe that prison sentence would change him, that maybe he would finally take life seriously. And for a while, it seemed like he tried. He jumped from one job to another, looking for stable work. Eventually, he was hired as a bus driver. But, disturbingly, he had only been on the job for 10 days before committing the crime that would make national headlines. He hadn't changed at all. Once Nor's body was found, police acted quickly. They traced the bus used that morning and confirmed that Hanafi was the driver. He was arrested 3 days after the murder, around 2:45 p.m. at the Port Klang bus terminal. Immediately, he was taken into custody for questioning. At the same time, investigators were still working to confirm the victim's identity. The autopsy was ongoing, and without a bag or ID, they had little to go on. So they turned to Hanafi. They asked him what he knew about the woman, about her belongings, anything that might help identify her. And after several hours of questioning, Hanafi finally gave them something. 5 hours later, he agreed to take the police to another location, a terminal in North Klang. He led them to a quiet, secluded spot, one that most people wouldn't notice or even care to look at. There, he pointed to a drain. Inside the drain, police found what he had discarded, a handbag. Inside were makeup items, personal belongings, and most importantly, identification documents. It was now official. The woman brutally raped, strangled, and dumped at a construction site was 24-year-old Nor Suzaili Mokhtar. Once Nor's identity was confirmed, her body was released to the family. Her parents, her brothers, extended family, everyone broke down. Her return wasn't the way anyone had imagined. The daughter who had gone off to start her dream job was now being laid to rest. A burial ceremony was held in Kangar Perlis, Nor's hometown. Friends, relatives, neighbors all came to mourn. Prayers were said, tears were shed. The entire community stood still that day, remembering a young woman who had done everything right, but still became the victim of something so wrong. Meanwhile, police were preparing to bring Hanafi Mat Hassan to court. The first trial was set for November 1st, 2000. Witnesses were summoned to give their accounts of what they had seen. The four who chased the bus, forensic specialists, and others tied to the investigation. During initial interrogations, Hanafi confessed that he raped Nor because he claimed he couldn't resist the urge after seeing her smile and beauty. Let that sink in. Nor did nothing. She boarded the bus, sat quietly, smiled, maybe out of politeness. And for that, this man decided she was his to take. On the basis of his confession and mounting evidence, Hanafi, then 34 years old, was formally charged with both rape and murder. Under Malaysian law at the time, murder carried a mandatory death sentence, and rape can bring up to 20 years in prison along with caning. His defense team tried to argue his innocence, claiming he didn't commit the murder, that he wasn't responsible. But the investigation said otherwise. 4 months later, on March 12, 2001, Hanafi stood trial at the Shah Alam High Court. It became a long and grueling legal battle. 62 days of hearings, more than 55 witnesses taking the stand, and mountains of evidence. Among the most damning was the forensic DNA report. The semen recovered from Nor's body matched Hanafi's DNA exactly. There was no question. It was him. In fact, the evidence was so overwhelming that at one point, even Hanafi's lawyer reportedly considered withdrawing from the case. Despite everything laid out in front of him, he kept denying. He claimed he never raped or killed Nor. He admitted, yes, he was the bus driver that morning. He acknowledged picking up a woman whom he said told him she was heading to a medical center in Klang, but insisted she got off the bus before reaching her stop. And then came his twist. He claimed that Nor wasn't the last passenger, but rather a male acquaintance boarded after her. He said he was chatting with this so-called acquaintance when he almost hit a cyclist, referring to Divan, the teenage witness who had chased the bus. According to Hanafi, the group of men seen chasing him were holding iron rods and sticks, and he only fled because he feared for his life. But none of that held up. There was no evidence to support his claims. No acquaintance ever surfaced. No weapons were recovered from the witnesses. His entire story fell apart under scrutiny. And then there was one final heartbreaking moment in court. Before the sentence was announced, Hanafi was being escorted by police through the elevator at Shah Alam High Court, surrounded by guards. In that packed, silent elevator, Nor's brother, Muhairis Mukhtar, stood face to face with the man who had destroyed his family. He looked Hanafi in the eyes and let out the scream of a broken brother. "You killed my sister, right? Why? Why did you kill her?" His voice cracked the air. It was raw, furious, filled with pain. Everyone inside that small space could feel the weight of that moment. The guards, the legal staff, everyone standing there, they could all hear the anguish in his voice. But Hanafi, he didn't say a word. He just stood there, smirking. Despite being handcuffed with guards on every side and the weight of a potential death sentence looming over him, Hanafi looked directly into Muhairis's eyes and smiled. Then, as if mocking him, he shook his head and said, "There's no way I did that, sir." The air in that elevator went still. The audacity. He was less than 2 feet away from the grieving brother, and yet he showed no remorse, no fear, just denial, and a smile. The story of the elevator confrontation spread quickly. People were stunned, not just by Hanafi's words, but by the confidence in which he delivered them. How could a man facing death deny the undeniable so casually? With eyewitnesses, forensic evidence, and DNA tying him to the crime, he still had the nerve to say it wasn't him. Then came April 26, 2002. The courtroom was packed when the judge stood to deliver his verdict. Hanafi's defense was ultimately rejected. The judge pointed to the DNA match between Hanafi and the semen found in Nor's body. When asked to explain it, Hanafi had no answer. He also couldn't explain how Nor's missing pendant ended up in his possession. The evidence was overwhelming. And so the verdict was clear. Hanafi Mat Hassan was found guilty of murder and sentenced to death by hanging. For the rape charge, he was also found guilty and sentenced to 20 years in prison with an additional 12 strokes of the cane. In the gallery, Moor's brother Muhairis and his friend Shahrin Abdul Wahid sat quietly. They were satisfied with the sentence, but the pain didn't disappear because no verdict, not even a death sentence, could erase what they had lost: their sister, her future, and her dreams. Still, across the country, people reacted. This time, justice had been served. The law had not looked away. But even as the news made headlines, more information about Hanafi began surfacing, and it only deepened the heartbreak. On the very same day Hanafi was arrested for raping and murdering Nor, his fourth wife had gone into labor. She gave birth to a baby boy, but the child was born premature and died shortly after birth. So, while Hanafi was committing one of the most horrific crimes in Malaysian history, his newborn son was taking his first and last breath. And there was more. Word spread about Hanafi's 3 daughters, children from his previous marriages. The public began asking, how could a man with daughters of his own do this to someone else's daughter? What was going through his mind when he chose to assault, rape, and kill an innocent woman while knowing what it meant to be a father? One of Hanafi's ex-wives later came forward and broke her silence. She said she never wanted her children to know the truth about the case, that it had tarnished her family's name, something she would never be able to fully escape. And when asked about her thoughts on Hanafi's sentencing, she said simply, he should be put to death quickly for what he did to that woman. Even his own mother, then 80 years old, was devastated when she learned of her son's crimes, but she didn't defend him. After the courtroom confrontation, after the verdict, after the world saw Hanafi for what he truly was, his family issued an apology to Nor's family. But Hanafi himself still refused to lower his head. He still insisted he had nothing to do with Nor's death. He filed an appeal, hoping to overturn both the conviction and the sentence. But on August 13, 2005, the Court of Appeal dismissed it. And on December 12, 2006, the Federal Court of Malaysia upheld everything: the death sentence for murder, the 20-year prison term plus 12 strokes of cane for rape. And if Hanafi's crimes weren't already despicable enough, his behavior during trial only reinforced how violent he truly was. Every time reporters gathered outside the courtroom trying to capture images of the man at the center of Malaysia's most shocking case, Hanafi lashed out. He kicked, punched, and assaulted journalists just for taking his picture. He didn't act like a man fighting for his life. He acted like a man who had nothing left to lose. With the courts rejecting his appeals, Hanafi had only one path left: a royal pardon from the Sultan of Selangor. But that too was denied. His fate was sealed. He would now die by hanging. And then on December 19th, 2008, 8 years after Nor's life was taken, Hanafi Mat Hassan was hanged at dawn in Kajang prison. His body was sent to Kajang Hospital for confirmation of death and then returned to his family. He was buried in his hometown of Binjai, Kelantan, at the Kampung Kubur Datu Cemetery. From the very beginning, this case shook the country. News headlines, TV segments, and radio call-ins were all filled with outrage. Even Prime Minister Mahathir Mohamad publicly condemned the crime. It also led to conversations. How could this happen on a public bus? People began calling for safety reforms, such as banning tinted bus windows, which prevented outsiders from seeing what was happening inside. The thinking was simple. If Nor had been more visible, maybe someone could have stepped in sooner. Around the same time, another rape murder, the case of Nor Suzaili Mokhtar, rocked the country again, only fueling public outrage. Women's rights groups also used the case to demand tougher rape laws and better protection for women, especially on public transport. And there were serious discussions about barring convicted criminals, especially sex offenders, from working in jobs like public transportation, not to discriminate, but as a basic safety measure. Justice was served, but the questions and pain from Nor's case haven't gone away. She didn't break the law. She didn't take risks. She was doing what millions of women do every day, going to work, chasing a future, getting on a bus home. But the person behind the wheel that day had a serious criminal record, and yet he was hired, trusted, put in a position of power over passengers like Nor. And so she ended up a victim. So let's think about this question before we go. How does someone with that kind of history end up responsible for the safety of others? What checks failed? Who looked the other way? How do we build a society where doing everything right is enough to keep someone safe? Let me know your thoughts below, and that is all for today. Thanks for watching.